in some of these projects here, so some of it might be familiar to it, but this is what I want to talk about today is not about technology and things like that. I want to talk about instructional design and conceptualization of these communities and to try and get an understanding here of what social learning actually is and what specifically a community of practice is, as opposed to broader concepts like social networks. So hopefully we'll emerge at the end of this with an idea of what these can be, and hopefully you'll be able to take away some ideas that you might want to apply within your own context, either in a face-to-face training environment or perhaps in an online context as well. So before I start looking at communities of practice, just wanted to talk a little bit about the technology situation and where we stand today in our digital world. Oops, we're going to move forward. Like me? Oh, there we go. So, the first thing I want to talk about here is about this abundance of statistics about technology. That's why I put it up there. Statistics, statistics, statistics. You know, everywhere you're going around the world today, they're talking about technology in big, big numbers. They're throwing out millions and billions, all these figures out there. And they sound so daunting and they sound so huge. And people are talking about exponential change. How, you know, what happens today, you know, tomorrow will be irrelevant tomorrow. Or this big statistic, for instance, which is interesting, you know, that all of the content that was created in 2009 is more than was created from the beginning of time to 2000 to 2008. So this huge amount of data, a huge amount of information that's coming to bear here. And I think that's all true, as I've said here, you know. But what I'm wondering is whether this huge potential here that everybody talks about has really been thought of very deeply in terms of its impact on education. I would venture to say that probably not, that we're projecting this potential, but we haven't really sat down and thought about what it really means and what changes it would have for the way we learn. And I ask myself the question here, is our social behavior as reflected in our daily lives today necessarily directly transferable to an educational context? I ask myself that because our students using Facebook, will they necessarily use Facebook in a classroom? I don't think that always this kind of question is being asked, and we tend to look at the technology first and not worry about the instructional design that goes with it. This little mouse, I'm going to go here. Go easier. So, technology turmoil right now. Okay, as you can see, there's all these different types of apps and different places that you can go. And all these tools are full of potential, but also incredibly confusing. And I think that all these tools are taking our eyes off of our real issues here, which is what are we doing with the tools? So how do we design instruction to incorporate them? And how do we integrate tools into the things we're doing in our face-to-face classrooms? I don't think there's a lot of information out there for teachers on how that takes place. I think it's a gap. And I think what we've had is we're putting the cart in front of the horse here, and where the focus should be shifted the other way around. And communities of practice are one way in which we can approach this. But take a look here, for example, here. Take a look at a comparison that I think is quite relevant right now. We have the education world on the one side and the everyday life on the other. And I don't think they always match up. So if you take a look here, our education world is still pretty much an analog place. Okay? We are using technologies, but you'd find in most organizations that they haven't permeated everything that we're doing. There are learning management systems in place, but I don't think that people are using the tools regularly or consistently, whereas everyday life, digital assets are just commonplace and accepted. So there's a gap here between the education world and everyday life. In the education world, we're still developing generic tools, okay? We're writing courses, and these courses are made by publishers who predict what learners are like, and therefore they are generic in a sense. In our daily life, everything is personal, everything is customized, mashups, and whatever you do on your home pages, it's all very personal. In the education world, we're still concerned with consumption, and in everyday life, increasingly we're talking about creation. Okay? And finally, in the education world, our world is still closed. Closed in our institution, closed in our classrooms, okay? Limited by a learning management system. And in everyday life, as we're seeing, it's opening up more and more and more. What that means for education is that in everyday life, students are not our audience anymore, and they shouldn't be an audience anymore in our classrooms. And at the same time, nor should teachers in their professional development be an audience anymore. So we need to take that into consideration in the way that we train our teachers and the way that we teach our students. And we need them to reflect on how the technology that we have at hand can actually go about doing that. So, just to talk about a few things that we do know clearly, okay? We know that change as a concept has changed, okay? We can't prepare ourselves or our students in the same way we could in the past because of the speed of change. Because of this, we have to think of new ways of approaching this. We have to consider the frequency of interactions. There are many more interactions going on nowadays than there ever have been in the past. There is a diversity of contexts that we have as well. People are meeting people from all over the world, but also different types of jobs are meeting together as well. The traditional hierarchies are breaking up. You're one thing on one day, you're another thing on another day. So we have a diversity of contexts. And what's happening is that all of this that is going on, the change, is being pushed by communication. Okay? And as we'll see as we work through this, the key to the future, I would maintain, is not to focus on things, but to focus on conversations. Okay? Value is in conversations. And we need to create structures in order to share, in order to teach our students, in order to teach ourselves, which facilitate that communication. Now, when building these structures, another key thing to think about is the nature of permanence. We're moving away from permanent structures, okay? So we need to wrap our heads around that when we create something, we can also just potentially discard it again. And this runs contrary to the way education tends to work. We tend to write a course, and then it might get edited, or we will create a lesson plan, and it gets filed away in a content repository, okay? But in the end, that material may not even be referenced over a certain length of time. It has a shelf life, and we need to understand that we need to be able, as you can see on the diagram here, to create, and yes, preserve some things, but equally be willing to discard and reorganize, okay? So a departure from permanence has to be a key fixture in here. We call it creative destruction, okay? Yeah? The ability to part with content as much as build it up. We don't need to hoard it, yeah? It can muddle the entire situation. What else can we say? What else do we know? We know that the transition model is in decline. Okay? We understand that. So, what I'm doing right now is in decline. All right? So, we know in the future, when we're looking at our students, from here, in the future, the students will get more of what they want and less of what someone else believes that they need. okay? And this applies also to us in professional development, which is the theme of what we're looking at today, is that in the future, we're going to have more autonomy, and we're going to have structures and frameworks which will enable teachers and students to make choices in the classroom and not have those choices dictated necessarily by the lesson plan that we create or the syllabus that we designed at the outset of the year. Now, we have to take into account new literacy. And I think that was pretty, just as a joke, but there are new literacies, okay? They are coming. We have to take into account new thoughts of, like, what is a text, for example? You know, soon, I look at it with my children in school. When they're creating now projects in school, they're able to create something that includes written text, video, and audio. But we as teachers aren't necessarily quite ready to wrap our head around how do we grade those, you know, because we're still very much aligned to the traditional paper or essay. We're not sure that we're really ready to recognize these other pieces as the same value, so to speak. And we don't have as many rubrics that help us understand what these new texts are all about. So we need to be clear that we need to address these new literacies that are going to impact everything that we do. We have to accept that the 21st century is technology driven, yeah? And it's changing the face of literacy. So we have to take into account digital literacy, the ability of ourselves and our students to be able to use the tools that we have in the 21st century. We have to address information literacy, the ability of students and teachers to be able to pick and choose intelligently from the wealth of information that is out there. We have to take into account the information literacy. We have to take into account that when students are accessing websites, they have to find ways to see how do you validate the information you're getting by looking for contextual clues on a website. For example, looking at the URL of a website will give you basic clues right there. Is it an .org or is it a .com? Automatically there, I've got a little bit of a clue. Yeah. When was the last time the website was updated? Yeah. If it's like 8 years ago, you know, as often happens, you know, you have another clue right there. Many websites are made very colorful and cool and snappy, and it could be the American Nazi Party. You know, you don't know. Yeah. You have to be careful about that. So information literacy is playing a major role. And as I just talked about, multimedia literacy, the ability to understand a text is bigger than just the printed word right now. But despite all this technology, the face-to-face interaction is going to retain its unique role. And you have to see it as a fundamental part of any learning community. And we're talking about communities here. So one of the challenges as we look forward is to see how do you take online communities and link them to the face-to-face environment, okay? And what is it in the face-to-face environment that needs to happen to make that face-to-face environment relevant? Because as I point here, in the case of instruction, the teacher must be really, really good and motivating and inspiring to attract the students to come to that face-to-face class if the technology is allowing you to access the content and potentially also go in and practice it, and maybe even be able to do some key production online. So clearly, you have to have something there and think about what your face-to-face classroom is going to give your students, and it's going to change the relationship between the student and the teacher. And one thing that I think is good about this technology is I think the digital period is pushing us as teachers to really recognize teacher and learner autonomy, identify it, and have to act on it, because you cannot get around it anymore. Because I don't know about it is for you, but I find it hard as a teacher, even though I believe in giving my students all those opportunities. It's hard to give up your role. You have a certain power in your classroom, and it's hard to give that role up. I find it's only natural in some cases that you You like to talk a lot and to control what's going on in your classroom. Well, in the future, we have to give that up, and I think that that's a good thing about technology, that it facilitates that. It forces us to confront autonomy. And that means that we have to change some of the ways that we look at our face-to-face classroom. What is it about face-to-face that keeps it going? And I found something interesting on the web recently, and I asked myself, if the face-to-face is completely falls by the wayside, then why the heck are we all sitting here talking to each other? Okay? Why didn't we just do this conference online? There's clearly something else going on, and I thought this thing that I found on the web was really interesting. This is actually done by, this guy is from South by Southwest Festival. I don't know, any of you know there's this alternative rock and music festival in Austin, Texas. And he was talking about it, and he was looking at this, and he has this graph here. So interaction richness, and then the communication tool capabilities, and you see as it goes, you know, the email, the IM, the Twitter, the blogs, the forums, the chat, the phone, the video chat. Okay, we're getting really close, but there's something missing right here. Okay. And it's something, as he says, something ineffable happens up here. And it turns the brain on. What is that? What is it that you get in the face-to-face that you can't get in the online? There is still a little gap there. There's something there. And we need, when we're designing whatever we're doing nowadays in the future, is to try and identify what that thing is. I think of it sometimes like, you know, that you can't smell a classroom online, for example. You know what I mean? That's the feelings, the emotions. Yeah, it's harder to convey. He puts in here emotional nuance. Yeah, the higher up you go here towards face-to-face, the more the emotional nuance comes. Yeah, but it's a question mark here, and I pose it, something to think about. But I think it's really, really important. If we can figure that out, you know, what is it, that element of the face-to-face that makes it unique? And then blend it with our online environments, then we're going to be able to manipulate both tools really, really effectively. So that's an interesting little graph that they have there. So, the key of what we're going to talk about today, though, is about building communities of practice. Okay? And this is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And it's become thrown around so much that it's generic. And I think the first thing we have to talk about is to determine what we're really building here. Okay? So, first of all, are we building, for example, a social portal? Does that mean that you're building something like a Bilgi website, for example, that has a little functionality which allows you as teachers to talk to each other and maybe have a little page where you introduce yourselves? That's a social portal, okay? Is it something like that? Is it a social add-on to a learning management system, which, for instance, Nesrin here is working on in a developmental module? In other words, are you having an online class where you fill in the blank type activities and then supplement that with interaction online through forums, blog posts, and things like that? Is that what you're creating? Okay? Is it a social community? Is it something like Facebook or the Bilgi Student Alumni Association? Okay? That's a place where you're building community, where people have some shared interests. Okay? It's a social community, a place to meet. Or is it a learning community? Is it a place you go to learn with other people? Something like that's that Live Mocha. Have you heard of Live Mocha? Online language learning. That's a place you can go to learn and learn from other people. Or is it a community of practice? Okay, a community of practice is deeper than these. Okay, and if we're going for a community of practice, we need to understand what makes that depth, and we'll look at that in a second. There's nothing wrong with building these, and they all have their value. And a community of practice can be each of these, but it's also more, and to understand that more is important. And so the most significant barrier or challenge to adopting social media and collaborative tools in education has been identified as a lack of strategy. And in this case, the first thing you have to understand is what you're making. Okay? And once you understand what you're making, then you can start to build it. Okay? So let's look at what the differences are between a social network and a community. Okay? Communities are united around a common sense of purpose and desire to learn with and from another. Okay? This is an instructional design issue. It is not a technology issue. A social portal and a community of practice can use the same tools. It's how you design the instruction. What's key, though, is that communities are not a sum of personal pages. Okay? Because if you go to Facebook, right, and you friend somebody, and then they have other friends friend you, they're not really your friend. Although some people out there in the world might get, in this feeling that these are all my real friends. They're not your real friends. They're just acquaintance upon acquaintance, etc. So that's not a community per se, okay? And it's interesting, when we were building out the community of practice, and Siddharth over there, as part of it, can remember this, is that our initial focus was, let's everybody build a profile page, and let's get them to build out this profile page, and from there, then everybody would begin, putting all rich material there. And we realized that is completely not what we need to do. We need to get them away from building their profile pages and to focus, again, as I mentioned before, on conversations. Okay? Communication around something that is important. And putting these home pages in there like that was distracting people from what we were actually trying to achieve. So it was like the light bulb went on and we understood all of a sudden what we were doing wrong. Okay? So later, personal pages can be just fine. But in the beginning, if you're trying to build a community, having people focus on their individual pages will take away from community building in my mind and not contribute to it. Let's look again at communities of practice versus social networks. Let's look at purpose. The purpose of a community of practice is learning, sharing, and creating. Okay? The purpose of an informal social network is creating communication links. Okay? Similar, but not quite the same. Okay? There's a boundary, which we'll look at in a second. The boundary of a community of practice is what we call the knowledge domain. We're united through a sense of purpose. Okay? In the informal networks we're creating, it's really the extent of the relationships that happen. Okay? Your network of friends, your personal learning network that you hear so much about right now in ELT. There's a lot of these different systems going out there. A-Planet is one. There's a few more. They are ultimately informal networks of individual people coming together, and their scope will just increase just based on random relationships that are getting established. They're not united by a common mission or a common purpose. Okay? In a community of practice, the connection is what we call shared action around a problem. Okay? In an informal social network, it's about personal contacts. Okay? It's much less prescribed. Membership in a community of practice would be ongoing as long as you're in the domain, the knowledge domain, or in the organization potentially. But communities of practice can, like I mentioned earlier, you can create and then you can discard. If communities of practice have solved their problem and really don't have another purpose at that point, then they can dissolve. Okay? Or be reorganized around another knowledge domain. Okay? In the informal network, it's individual. It's not based on the common goal. You can stay a member or you can delete your profile. It's entirely up to you. Okay? And the lifespan of a community of practice is as long as it generates value. In an informal network, it's open-ended. And this idea of value is huge in a community of practice. The community generates value for your organization, okay? It needs to be measurable. A community is not a community of practice if it's just a bunch of random conversations. You have to be able to see that it's improving something within your organization. And of course, the only way to know that is if you understand why you're doing it in the first place. Okay? Oops. So actually, let me jump here first. What problem am I trying to solve? Okay? Building your community of practice begins with answering that question. Okay? What are we uniting about? What is the mission statement, to use a business term? Okay? Now, in the case of the Laureate Network, to give you the example, you know, those of you who work at Bilgi are familiar with the Laureate Network, with the 60 universities around the world. We wanted to find out what unites all of our efforts, and one thing that we decided on was that we are united by a common goal to make sure that every student in the Laureate Network leaves their university with a minimum of a B1 level of English, everywhere. Some of them, like here in Turkey, where you're preparing students to study in English, will go higher. But in places like, you know, Ecuador or in Costa Rica, they just have 4 hours of English a week. We want to make sure they at least have that B1. So essentially, our community of practice is united along that's our mission, to get all the students to B1. We defined it, that's what we want to do. And everything we do in that community is ultimately rolled back to that goal. That's what we have to always bear in mind when we're doing what we're doing. So to go back again then here, that was the understanding what our domain is. Our domain is an institution with a mission to bring students up to the level of B1. That's the big mission that we have. Now there's lots of sub-missions, because within that, one of the ways to do that is, for example, to make sure that all of our teachers have a certain level of training, to make sure that we have a certain way of working in the classroom, the introduction of technology, all of these sub-goals. But they're all linked to the overall domain, which is the domain of teachers trying to bring students up to B1. Okay? So when you're thinking of developing your own community, understand what your mission is for it first. Okay? And go from there. Once you've established your domain, then you build your community. And the community are all the students, teachers, whoever it may be, that are united for this common sense of purpose. And then once you have your domain and your community, you have your practice itself. And the practice and the community feed off each other to create value, and that value is aimed at fulfilling your overall mission. That's a very, very broad view of what a community of practice is all about in the highest philosophical sense. So, some other ways of looking at this. These are some of the other questions that you want to think about. Why do we exist? So obviously the mission is the key part of that. But ask yourself the question, do you need a community of practice to fulfill your mission? Maybe you don't, okay? So you might want to think about that. What is the rationale for it? What do our students and teachers want from the community? What are the needs, okay? So you need to think about that a little bit, needs analysis. What can the community provide to be able to bring us to get to that mission? Okay? So if B1 is our target, and we're not hitting that yet, why aren't we? What is this community of practice going to provide to us and enable us to make this happen? Think about the roles and responsibilities of members of the community, and we'll look at that in a second. Think about how the community lives and breathes. What does a day in the life of our community look like? What does it look like on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? As we'll see, this thing is not a technology solution. It's all about people. The technology is secondary. It's about the people in the organization. And finally, and this is the one technology question that you would ask, is access and convenience. So you got to ask yourself, if you're going to build this community, is it going to be a comfortable thing for people to get to, or is it a pain? You know, if it's stuck behind a firewall of your institution, that's going to make it harder to get to. It's going to be inconvenient, and it's going to lead to the inability sometimes to access people from outside the network, as we will see. And if you have any comments or questions, just interrupt me. A couple of things about expectations. 1, 10, 90. Okay? When you're building a community of practice, you can assume that 1% of your members will create content. Smiling there, you know what I mean. It's not a huge number. 10% of those members will communicate around that content, and 90% of your members of your community will just view it or download it. And I compared this statistic here with YouTube, okay? This is the recent statistic, 2011. 200,000 videos get uploaded, and 100 million get looked at, okay? So that's the kind of ratio that you have here. So it's important to be realistic and not get frustrated, of course, because if you expect everybody to do everything, it's never going to happen. But more importantly, what this means is that you have to pay extra special attention to these guys and extra special attention to these guys, okay, as we'll see. You need to nurture them, give them opportunities, and try, as much as possible, to move people from the 90 up. But to understand these people who are doing this and to give them those opportunities to take advantage of the social network you're creating, and then make that value available for everybody else. So who are these people in the community? Well, first of all, there's the sponsor of the community, okay? That's the organization, yeah? It can be the English department, okay? That's entirely up to wherever you are, but there has to be somebody who sponsors it and basically acknowledges the mission of your community of practice, okay? In the case of a school, it may be that the university, the rector, or whoever buys into this and says, this is a policy now that we recognize, and it's a goal that we've set for ourselves. In business, it's goes into your plan or something like that. Underneath this, we have, as next group, the facilitators/mentors. And we'll look at this in a little more detail now. But as I said, communities of practice don't happen on their own with no intervention. Lots and lots of back channel activity going on. Okay? There is prodding, there is talking, there is mentoring. Yeah? When a new person comes into this network, to make them not feel lonely and just disappear. They need to be supported. They need to be reached out to. So although this is taking place in an online environment, and where there's all these different tools for communication, don't assume that communication takes place just because the tools are there. Okay? It won't. So the facilitators play a huge role in all of this, a massive role, the most important role. And they can't be underestimated. So we feel, when we're looking at things now, that you're probably looking at your facilitators as being your initial 1%, your core group, and then you move out from there. But you need to be aware that it's going to take time and investment to move that forward and to get people active. Now, you have an archivist or librarian. As I've said, social networks are about communication around a content which provokes conversation. And in that conversation, you find the elements of knowledge which then can lead to becoming actual learning objects, per se. I give you an example. If you go on a discussion forum and you see the conversations going on, if you have the time to go and read them and grab them, you're going to find incredible information and know-how. And so one of the keys in the social network is to have the archivist or librarian, whoever that person is, who might be a facilitator or somebody else, to have that person be able to grab the content off of the community of practice and then take what is relevant like that, that has more permanence, and to put it in some form of repository within the network so it's accessible to other people. Technicians. You do need people who understand the technology and who are there and able to help their peers, the super users, so to speak. So that's another role that somebody plays. All these roles can be played by the same people. Okay, they're not individual necessarily. I mentioned the core team. Okay, when you get started with a community of practice, you need to have a core team that's pushing it. And that core team is going to be very active, and it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to be a lot of this back channel conversation, as I've spoken about. Subject matter experts. Well, in your community, you have your mission, you need to know something in order to perform your mission, in our case of getting to B1, and that might be something like being able to teach process writing, for example. Well, you need to get that expert in there who can teach your community about that. So we have subject matter experts that you bring in to address matters of importance of the community. And of course, participants, just strictly participants themselves who are out there in your network. So these are the kinds of roles that you play. Now, seen in a slightly different way, you could look at it this way. So you have in the middle, in the core, the active core, the 1%. That's your leaders and your facilitators, okay? And then you have occasional people in the network. Those are your beginners who are coming in, and those experts that I just spoke about, because they're not always there, they're coming in and out. So you will get an expert involved, they may stay in it for a little while and then fade out, and then maybe come back when it's relevant again, but they are participating. Then you have your peripheral people, your lurkers, the grand majority, okay? And of course, those people, the goal is to try and draw them in here as much as possible. But since you understand that you're not going to get that huge number of them, you need to make sure that these guys and these guys are generating enough value so that they can find it. And finally, the transactional group, the outsiders. The understanding that you don't want your community of practice to be closed. Because while the community is generating knowledge through the conversation from peer to peer, at the same time, not everybody in your network is going to know everything. So you're going to have to go outside to get more information. You're going to have to learn new things from outside the network and bring it back in. So there is the interaction with the rest of the world that goes on in your community of practice. Your community of practice may link to another community of practice. Your community of practice may be embedded in a larger network of communities. So you don't want to forget the external, the outside, the transactional side of things as well. Oops, I'm using the wrong computer. There we go. So, a little more about the facilitators, okay? We like to call this orchestrated spontaneity, okay? Is that the network should feel like it's self-propelling, but in fact, it is really guided, especially in its early days. And this orchestrated spontaneity, I learned this from the guy who created Barack Obama's social media campaign. He spoke to us at Gloria, and I had a chance to sit down with him and say, you know, we want to do this community of practice. And he was all about that. He said, you know, it's all about this orchestrated spontaneity, that you have to plan it out. Right now with Obama, I get on this iPhone now, I get emails from Obama probably twice, 3 times a week. Gordon, did you know that there's going to be a meeting in your town? You know, about this or that? Yeah? Or I got another one, said, Michelle and I wanted to just wish you and Katya a happy Mother's Day. Yeah? And we believe that families, blah, 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 important. So what he's doing is, it feels spontaneous, but it's all planned. It's all this idea that they have the whole year set up and calendared, and they know where they're going to do specific events, some local, some not. You need to bear that in mind, and you need to think about that. You need to think about it like 1 week, 1 month, 1 year even out. The invisible hand, the facilitator, has to do the back channel conversations. You probably do that anyway in other more traditional ways of teaching. I know that in our developmental modules, online modules, you know, if a student isn't participating, you send them an off network emails, you know, saying, why aren't you attending, etc. like that. It's the same here. You have to go in and reach out to these people and grab them and get them in. The calendaring is very important. You need to have things, we'll look at some activity types in a second, like events, and you need to be able to put the events together and use them to link people around your community. And I'll give you an example of what we're doing today. This event today in Bilgi is going to the entire Laureate network, okay? Now, we could just sit there and post it up on the social on the community of practice and say, okay, go there and see, you know, a Bilgi session, an ELT conference, and leave it at that. But what we're going to do is not that, but we're arranging little face-to-face viewing meetings with the teachers. So, I don't know necessarily this presentation, but some of the, you know, the plenaries, what's going to happen is that in Universidad de las Americas in Chile, 10 teachers are going to sit together with their coordinator and watch this on video and talk about it. And then, hopefully, they're going to post some comments and ideas back into the community of practice, okay? So, linking face-to-face activities to the online community, I think that's really, really important. Especially in distributed networks where you don't have everybody in the same place. To talk about it face-to-face and then bring that back in is huge. And it's much better than just accessing that video on its own. We do have webinars too, of course, in there in the social network to get people excited. Live webinars. We've done, we just did one, who went to Turkey, it was Portugal, right? Yeah, she gave a webinar for us, you know, and people came in and saw that live in synchronous time. And those are really good, you advertise them that way. You just need to think about the pacing and the calendaring of that so that there's always something to look forward to. It's kind of like that. I never pronounced that guy's name right. Shistin Mihali, what the Hungarian name? Is that how you pronounce it? The guy who comes up with the concept of flow in education? This idea, as I understand what he wants. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Flow. He talks about flow, and I think it's really important in these communities of practice that you see this idea of flow and rhythm within the community. That you've got to sense as your core group, you have to sense the rhythm of your participants, and you have to know when you have to do an intervention of a live event, when, you know, the community might be tired, when you might need to put new content into your community, for example, to unite people around that content. Because the way the community functions is through conversations around relevant content. So maybe we do post something new and interesting, and then get a conversation engaged there. Okay? Content, for example, could be a book review. Okay? Or a reading group, which is something that is being explored. Let's all get together and read a book about language teaching, and let's discuss it, okay? And we'll post the e-book into the community of practice so that everybody can get it. Okay? So, So, thinking about it also here, the moments in the life of a community member. So we need to bear in mind that when people enter into your community, they're going to have to grow, like kids grow too, and become mature adults. So I think the steps that we see here are, first of all, membership. And you can't force people to join a community of practice. They have to want to join a community of practice. So that's the first step, is to get them involved. And once they're involved, they need to be mentored. So that people who don't get any points, they're not being in any way disenfranchised or put in a bad position. It's just the really good ones just roll right up, and then you can scroll down. So if you do a professional development module, like the one that you're doing right now, if you do something like that in the social network, you might accrue 30 or 40 points of professional development. And in short, what's happening is you're being able to create some values there within the network, which will help you understand, who do I need to contact, and it gives you validation and recognition within the network. We're looking at this as an idea of being able to disaggregate professional development. We want to take our traditional units of teacher training and break them up into smaller portions and allow teachers to take choices in how they want to develop. Around the concept of this, for example, 300 developmental points this year you have to achieve. 50 of those points have to be done in some form of training module, and the rest is up to you. So the more active you are in your community of practice, the more you contribute, the more you help others, the more professional development points you gain, the more you're recognized within your community, the more value you're giving to that community, the more interaction takes place. So we're disaggregating this, you're having them make decisions. How's that work? Tagging the developmental chunks of learning based on different what you call meta tags. So we decide what are our relevant categories, so that people can also find what they're looking for specifically, and basically decide for themselves. And at the end, they have accrued the kind of points that they need, but they've been in control of their own professional development here. So we think that this gamification, we don't want it to take the upper hand and become a game in itself, but we think it's a good way of empowering the entire network or community there, and also helping people to raise their profile within the community of practice. Let me make sure I'm on time here. Okay, all right. So, here is something that was done by Etienne Wenger. Etienne Wenger is the father of the concept of community of practice. He's a Swiss guy, and he created this concept a while back. And this is essentially how it would look. Okay? As you can see, it's definitely not linear in its approach. Okay? So first of all, you can look at it horizontally, okay? So within the community of practice, you learn from each other and you learn with each other, okay? There's a distinction, okay? I know something, okay, and you know something, but you know something that I don't know, so I can find out from you, okay? That's learning from each other. Learning with each other, we're all sitting in a reading group together, and through that conversation, we're enriching ourselves. Not unlike what Borchu said earlier today, with the eggs. Same idea, with exchanging of ideas. So that's on the horizontal. Then we have the vertical here, and that's the vertical trajectory from informal learning to formal learning. Okay? Because informal learning can take place simply by somebody asking a question, okay? Or somebody, telling a story, or giving a tip, yeah? Broadcasting an inquiry, for example, okay? Or exploring ideas, okay? make some notes here. Or then the other one, inside out. Yeah? So, learning from outside sources. Yeah? Right now at this conference, right? I'm not from here, so I'm coming here telling you something about communities of practice, okay? I'm an outside source. Or learning from each other here, for each other, basically sharing practice within your community itself. So keeping yourself open to the outside, but then, being able to enrich each other. And then, of course, you have these islands, or as they look more like golf balls, yeah, okay? And each of these islands are a specific type of learning. So, this island 1 is sharing, okay? So what are you sharing? You're sharing pointers to resources, okay? Twitter feed, if you want to do technology. Twitter, quick, saw a great resource here, okay? News, okay? RSS feeds in the case of our technology, something like that. Or just because this doesn't have to only be online, having a cup of coffee and sharing the news right there can work as well. Information, stories. Stories are huge. We're really interested in capturing stories because we think that stories about teachers are very important. And one of the things that I think is important is the visual nature of stories. I want teachers telling their stories in this network, and I'm hoping to get teachers to basically take a few minutes and post short videos to talk about this, because you can learn so much from those stories. Giving tips, document sharing, of course, too. Yeah? And then you have productive inquiry, number 2 here, okay? And as you can see, there are different places on the scale from formal to informal, as you can see, yeah? So you broadcast an inquiry. I need to know something about this. Can you help me? You're exploring different new ideas together, or maybe in a case study area. You do a project together and you have an after-project review, okay? Or you give peer assistance. Negotiating, sharing and understanding, and number 3, okay? Joint events, joint responses, reading groups, debates, hot topic discussions, and polls. Okay, all kinds of interesting things that you can do there. Polls and surveys are great to get that started. You know that from the classroom itself, how you can use that to generate discussion. It's huge in the community of practice. Number 4, producing assets. Okay. Collaboration, learning projects, collections, problem solving, documenting. So you say, number 5 is similar to number 4, but is creating standards. So you create different content, but you also create the standards by which you can measure your success in your mission. Okay? Now that might be external benchmarking, like with Bell Guys, where they come in and do quality assurance in our universities. There's an external measure, okay? Or it might be an internal measure, an internal benchmark that people are creating, okay? And of course, these ones in number 5 fall down in the formal area, okay? And then that leads you to number 6, the formal access to knowledge. So here's where your traditional training and workshop comes in. Here's where you get your invited speaker, okay? Here's where you have a help desk, all right? And Q&A, and specific Q&A, okay? I have a question, okay? And you post that question and try and get an answer, okay? And then finally, visits. So I like this concept. Let's take the community of practice out on a field trip, okay? Community of practice, we're going to go to a university somewhere and visit it. I'm really interested in doing that, Today the community of practice is going to visit Bilgi, okay? Set it up, show around Bilgi, meet the people at Bilgi, maybe attend a class, You can do all these things, and that's another way of getting involved. So the community, and this whole idea of scheduling that I was talking about, this is a lot right here. And no community of practice, especially getting started, is going to be able to do all of this. You will pick and select the things that work for you. But the whole idea is that you need to think about the scheduling of this, the designing of it. You know, you have to really create a framework for this to happen, and then get your core leaders to push it. Basically, what you're trying to do, seen in another way, is you're trying to link processes, people, and projects to something that's much harder to capture in training, and that's emotions, opinions, and facts, and put them together. Those things together are what we're calling the effective hubs within your community of practice. And moving right along here, just a couple of things. How are we doing on time, by the way? Oops, got another 5 minutes? Give me 5? Just quickly here, some of the success factors here in being able to maintain your community of practice. You have here awareness. So you're a person in your network and you say, I need someone to do something. I need someone to help me. And you're someone here says, I am someone who can help someone else. Okay? So in awareness, who's out there? How do I get known? Your social network, your community of practice has to address this problem. How are you going to make that happen? Competence. How is this person going to know that that person is competent? And similarly, this person has to figure out, how am I going to be able to highlight my skills? The gamification can provide you the way to highlight those skills, and at the same time give this guy the information he needs to know to make a decision. Benevolence. But is this guy going to help me? And over here, does this guy even want to help somebody else? Or is this a lurker who's just going to stay away? Don't forget, this could be an incredibly experienced person, but really never really want to engage. So maybe when you talk to them, you find out, will they engage? These are the social aspects. You can look at feedback that people give each other and how quickly that feedback comes. Look at the informal learning, the liveliness, the contribution patterns. Is everything always being contributed by one person, or is it well distributed? And how sustainable is the interaction? Does it ebb and wane? Does it wane over time, or is it something that you're able to really keep going? One way to look at it is the so-called Brinker-Hoff success case methodology. You identify the goals of your community of practice, and then you measure the data to identify successful and unsuccessful members, and then you conduct interviews with these people and collect their stories to understand why the successful people were successful and why the people that weren't successful were not. And then you share that knowledge with everybody else. And the final words, okay? I say, forget about personal learning environments and trying to create your own space and your own network, because the very definition of your own defeats the community concept, okay? Focus on conversations and not on just creating a content repository. The power and the knowledge is in the conversation. You can turn that into content later, but what you want is that conversation, okay? Harvest those conversations, and those conversations that you harvest become what you call your community memory. And ultimately, that community memory is going to translate into tangible products and tangible value for the community of practice. So, in a nutshell, that's it. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out. Again, you can practice this on a very small level between 3 people, or you can go for 300,000. It's entirely up to you. So I hope that explained a little bit. Thank you.